Hi, I'm Terri Murphy with the Data Advocate, and today we have Bill Fowler with us, and he's such an interesting person because he is so amazing about his background in all things MLS. He is currently the founder and president of a newer company, SourceRE, a subsidiary of Modern Tech, and we've had Joe Schneider on, so that'll be interesting, Bill. Just a little bit to give our viewers a little more information about you. You started way back as the CMO of Solid Earth, and that was 12 years with them, and they were the early pioneers of web-based MLS. So your history with MLS pretty much spans your lifetime, doesn't it?
Yeah, it started when I realized that I really didn't want to be in the advertising industry any longer, and my brother started a technology company, and so I thought, hey, nepotism, let's see how long we can ride that wave, and it was about 12 years, yeah.
Well, it's not only that, but then you joined Zillow to found the industry relations team. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, industry relations is a fancy term for buying dinner and drinks for all the executives in the MLS industry. And at the time, Zillow needed kind of an extreme makeover in terms of their image and their position on the inside of the industry. And so myself and Steve Allen and Chris Keel and Jen Inghauser and a group of folks that were been around the block a few times were hired to found that team. Yeah.
And then you were recruited to establish the IR team at Compass. We've heard of them. 4 years growing that influence with NAR, top MLSs, giving you a great background for what you're doing right now. So we are in I'd like to say a shift, a transition for the real estate industry. I've been in really, really, really a long time. MLSs are morphing, and that is what helped you with SourceRE. Tell us a little bit about how that's going to help MLSs today.
Yeah, so when my brother and I were working at Solid Earth, he was the president and founder of that company. We were building MLS platforms, going up against the likes of InterRealty and First American and the largest companies in the space at the time. And the internet was in its infancy as far as real estate was concerned. And so during those days, we built a rock solid backend. You had to. We were the first Oracle database in the industry. We had MongoDB, and as things progressed, we were had built server racks around the country as part of this process. When you're building software, you had to have hosting and so on, and data centers and heated and cooled square footage. You know the idea. And we also had a front end. We had 26 full-time developers, and a lot of those people were devoted to the back end. And we realized that we were doing both of those things fairly well, but if we could only focus on one of those things, then we would be much better to compete with the big guys. And so SourceRE is based on the idea that MLSs can control their own backend, not only their database, but the management of that data, the flow of that data. And right now, they're reliant on a handful of companies that do both front end and back end, just like we did in the early days at Solid Earth. And we feel that's not an ideal situation for the larger MLSs, that they have the ability now to take control of their own plumbing, so to speak, and determine how their data is used, when, and by whom.
So it's also data kind of security. Would you agree?
100%. And that was, so Terri, the interesting thing was, this was a concept that we, Andrew Coca, who's the CEO at Modern Tech, and I had been bouncing around for a while. And then suddenly Rapatoni happened, and the industry was kind of awakened to the idea that there's a single point of failure, and the MLS has one asset, and that is their data. And should that get sidetracked in some way, then they have no one to blame but themselves, actually, for renting out this core technology.
Well, that was the concern about Zillow when we opened the doors for that. So, and I know that right now the industry is really in the news, and we are part of a interesting group that's going to be meeting in Milan with Realtina, the MLS International Forum. And having been there last year in Paris, where you also were speaking, we realized that the European market has no transparency, no organization, no efficiency. How do you see that going forward with what you're doing with SourceRE?
Yeah, that conversation and the conversations we had in Paris played into the idea that we were just gaining more fuel to create this company. Excuse me. So, we spoke to Germany, we spoke to France, and you and I were part of these conversations. It's a very small group, actually. that was in Paris at the time. But it seemed like it was the right people at the right time. And so, as from the US, we're imagining we may look a lot more like Europe here in the next handful of years in the way that transactions are managed on the buy side, particularly. And so if we were to do it over again, so as you're looking at your European counterparts and saying, if they were going to establish an MLS, where would they start? And I think Sam DeBoard, who was also, there on stage, made a great argument for we start with standards. We start with data, obviously, but we start with standards. And then very soon after that, we start with a core database. Everyone wanted to talk about user interface and all those things, which is important. But you have to start with the foundations of how data is stored and maintained, and that's around standards in a database. And then you get to Realtina and the value they bring, which is, in a beautiful user interface that allows people to buy and sell.
Yes, we have lots of discussions about that. Well, you are a past board member of RESO, and I don't think a lot of the listeners understand real estate standards organization. These are how we standardize. And I remember the discussions back in the days where I was listing and selling a lot, and the conflict that smaller boards were having because they didn't speak the same language, so to speak. So a half a bath could be a 0.5 or a 0.1, and there was confusion. And we know that in Europe, I say Europe, but I mean outside of the United States, there's not this efficiency. Do they know, or do you think that they're aware of the value of all the data that's going through there that would make them have more of a propensity to want to join a more efficient MLS structure?
I think what we have to overcome first, which is something we have to still overcome in the United States, is the feeling that our territorialism, which we think somehow is a valuable asset to our business, is more important than this cooperative kind of environment that the data allows us to create. So the first thing you have to do is, there are people who are making lots of money in Europe based on this chaos.
Oh,
and yeah, and there are MLSs like the Bay Area, for example, that has 5 or 6, depending on which angle you look at it. And there are people in the Bay Area that would prefer that it stay that way. Not really realizing the benefit of a collaborative effort there to get everyone on the same platform. Or anyway, the truth of the matter is that standards and a single core database around a single set of ideals is what MLS is. And if we're going to push that opportunity, we have to then sell the value that we are stronger together than we are as individuals.
Well, that's just such a great statement, because ultimately this whole thing serves a consumer. The consumer needs to have the trust. The consumer needs to have the transparency. We know that some of the stories that we heard at MLS International Forum in Paris, that was not the case, and that there was a lot of fear and distrust. So as SourceRE, maintaining independent databases, data management services, and MLS, what do you see in the next 1 to 5 years with how that can really contribute to more organization efficiency and buyer and seller confidence?
Yeah, I think that we're seeing a stratification of the industry in terms of production. So if you look at the MLS population nationally, and then you break that down into market level, about 30% of the MLS participants are not participating. There are people who have a license, who carry a license and pay their dues, and don't actively participate in the marketplace. They need a certain level of technology. They do need it. When they log into the MLS, they expect certain things to happen, and they should get that service. Then there's the top 15% or so of the market who are doing all the business. And this is the 80-20 rule that you and I have lived with our whole career. They need a different level of service. And so if the MLS masters its own data, meaning that they have the control over that information, and then can then plug in certain products and services based on the production that I just mentioned, they can serve their member where they are. And I think that is a new paradigm the MLS is just now, well, some MLSs are just now waking up to, is that a full-time 200 transactions a year Terri Murphy deserves an extreme level of service, the filet mignon, so to speak, at the top of the menu. And that the Bill Fowler, who is doing 1 transaction a month or fewer, deserves service, but a different level. And the only way you can offer that variety of services and products is to control your own destiny at the core level, which is your database. And that's what SourceRE is about. That's
just so insightful, and it's so needed. Well, in closing, since we're going to be in Milan in October of this year, what if it were a perfect world for you, the message and then maybe the outcome, what are you expecting to happen there?
Well, I think it's the most important thing, I think, from a European and American partnership standpoint, because we had the Paris meeting, and you and I have talked to our friends overseas long enough to know there is no shortage of opportunities. What there is a shortage of is execution. So if we're to go there in the wake of what happened in Paris, where we all, locked arms and said we need to work together, it's really up to the leadership that's going to be there. It's with Stellar and FMLS and Austin with Unlock and those people who are actually MLS executives and people like you and me that can further these conversations to get something to actually take place. What does a partnership look like? And I don't plan on going to Milan without coming home with something concrete. And that doesn't mean just business or commerce. It means that we have a plan of action.
Well, I am excited about the prospect of working with you again, as we are at the Data Advocate with Saul Klein and John Riley, and of course the team at Realtina. It's an exciting time, and having been in the business as long as we have, how interesting it is that we're back at it in a new way to help facilitate better efficiency and hopefully, we all need it, collaboration. Thank you so much for joining us. And if somebody wanted to reach you to speak on this particular subject or to have another interview, what would be the best way to reach you?
Oh, LinkedIn, Bill Fowler. You'll find me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest thing. I have like 4 email addresses, so let's not try to do that. If they can find me on LinkedIn, please reach out.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Terri Murphy for the Data Advocate with Bill Fowler. Join us again for another great interview.